Welcome to the IT Fundamentals. I'm your host, Mark Haupt, and welcome back to this episode where we're going to talk about disk management today. Welcome to IT Fundamentals. I'm your host, Mark Haupt, and we're going to talk about disk management today and hopefully a fairly short conversation about that, but very informative, of course. So, disk management is something that is not covered very heavily inside of IT fundamentals, but you need to know a couple of fundamentals before you can start looking at taking the test and understanding what needs to happen. The reason it's not covered in depth here is because we get into in-depth coverage of that during the CompTIA A Plus and other types of certifications like Server Plus and so on and so forth. But let's take a look at disk management. All right. So we're all familiar from our previous conversations about disks. And we have hard drives, HDDs, hard disk drives that are usually the spinning disks. We have SSDs or solid state drives that are memory chips that can be a few terabytes, 1 to 2 terabytes in size, all the way down to just a couple of megabytes in size, quite frankly. And then you have USB flash drives, which are essentially SSDs and much smaller scale. So when you get down to those smaller, few megabytes or 16 gig, 32 gig, even 64 gig. In fact, I've got a couple of them in my bag here that are 256 gigabit solid state drives. That's removable media, if you will, USB drives, things that will attach or micro SD cards that are put into cameras, things along those lines. But all of those types of things, including optical drives, can be managed by the disk management tool in Windows. And you can get to that by doing the Windows function key and X combination and then selecting disk management. It looks like what you see in figure 4.35 in the book on page 226. And what you see on here is you see that every single hard drive is listed there. So you're looking at disk 0 partition 1, and we'll talk about partitions in a moment. That is what you would call your boot disk. Then you've got one that's called factory image, and that is on most commercially produced computers, a copy of the Windows source code, or at least the Windows reinstall capability is in that spot. That's the second one on there. And then you have the HPC drive, and that's your primary booting drive. And then you have a system drive, is what I call a disk storage space. Now, you'll notice that the C drive, let's start with the disk partition. It's 871 megabytes, not gigabytes. You've got the factory image, which is about 12 at 11.53 gigabytes in capacity. Then you have a C drive, which is 453.2 gigabytes. And then your system drive, which is 100 megabytes. Now, their system drive there, it could be used for a number of different items. I normally call my system drive or my D drive. That's where my data and applications would be installed, so that my C drive can remain fairly static and fairly clean. So any of the changes, if you will, would occur on a different drive. And that actually helps keep the drive more efficient and faster running. Now, in the section below that where it says disk 0, you'll notice there's system, HP, then there's a healthy recovery point there that's 871, and then there's a factory image. Now, all of those are represented in the volume information that's right above it. So what this is saying is that there's essentially one hard drive on this computer that's been partitioned 4 times. Now, let's talk about partitions for a moment, because that's about the only thing you need to understand for IT Fundamentals Plus is partitioning. What partitions does is it takes a hard drive and it slices it up into the physical aspect of it into logical spaces. All right. So, for example, if you have a 1 terabyte SSD, you could slice that up into 4 equal 256 gigabit logical segments that the computer sees as 4 different hard drives. Or they are 4 different partitions, but it's going to view it as 4 different hard drives. So you could have one as your C drive, one is your D drive, one is your E drive, one is your F drive, and so on and so forth. And you could store different things on them. All right. So that's partitioning. So you can think of it this way. If you have one big room in your house, so lots of houses these days are built on the open concept model, meaning as much of it is open as you possibly can. Well, back when I was growing up, everything was on the closed concept model, which is if you walk into some older houses from the 70s or even the 1800s, early 1900s, you'll notice that they have a living room and a kitchen and a dining room, all separate with four distinct walls instead of the open concept where standing in the kitchen, you may be able to see into the living room and the dining room all simultaneously. And it's only the fact that you put different furniture in each room that makes it a difference, because otherwise it's just one big room, or maybe slightly maybe some just load bearing small stanchions or something that are in there. So if you were to break each one of those rooms up into individual like they used to do in a home, or probably the way it is in your upper level of a two-story house where we still don't have open concept, and we hopefully never will have open concept for bedrooms. You have multiple bedrooms, like in a 4-bedroom house, and you got a square house or a rectangle house, you'd have 4 distinct rooms in there, perhaps even 6, because you're going to add a couple of bathrooms, right? So that is partitioning, is when you put the wall up, you create an individual room. It's all contained within the same house, but you have a master bedroom, and you have a guest bedroom, and you have another bedroom, and maybe a bathroom or something like that. That's kind of the equivalent of partitioning on the hard drive. It's all one hard drive, but you're breaking up into separate locations or separate rooms. Okay, so that's fundamentals on partitioning. And then the other thing that you need to know for IT Fundamentals Plus is in regards to the whole concept of just overall disk management, and the fact that after you partition off a disk, in order to make it available, it's not just a matter of partitioning. You actually have to format that hard drive in the way you want it. Now, when we talk about hypervisors and virtualization, as you might recall from episode 38 that I mistakenly called 39, with the hypervisor in the type 2 hypervisor, where you have an operating system installed, then the hypervisor, and then guest operating systems on top of that, you need to partition those hard drives off, or portions of the hard drive, in order to have the guest OSs be able to be installed and the hypervisor to be installed on top of the operating system. You also do this for certain under type 1. So what you do is you have your hypervisor that's across the entire disk, and then you have multiple partitions that would handle the guest OS 1 and guest OS 2. Those would be 2 different partitions on the disk. So that's the thing you need to do is format the hard drive once you do the partition, so it's prepared to operate as you intended to operate. So for Windows, you would partition it off, and then you would format it in either a FAT32, a file allocation table, 32-bit, or a NTFS, which would be the Windows NT file system formatting. That would be what you use for like a Windows server. The Linux, you could format it into a Linux format, and iOS for Apple, you can format it into an iOS format as well. But getting that formatting on there is the next key step in the process. All right, that is disk space management. That's all you need to know for IT fundamentals is in disk space management, is the fact that you could partition disks, you can slice up a single disk into multiple sizes, and then in order to use it, really begin using it, you need to format it. You know those 2 things, you know everything you need to know about partitioning or about disk management within IT fundamentals. All right, we'll come back next time and talk about memory management. So be ready for doing some more partitioning, sort of, kind of, maybe with memory. Later.